This week's video is a continuation of my twice turned bowls. This is a maple crotch. It did crack, so I did end up fixing that with epoxy. But tune in and see how I fixed it and how it ended up being a very beautiful bowl. So this bowl has been in my kiln for 1 week. It went in at about 30% moisture. It's come out at 10. So that's quick drying, which is what I wanted. It is a Christmas gift. Christmas is coming. But it wasn't too fast. I mean, I had a few cracks early on, but I put some CA glue in those and they stopped them. They didn't get any worse. Matter of fact, I think they drew together a little bit. So I'm ready to mount this on the lathe. Now it's going to be out around. I can see that just by looking at it, that it's bigger in this direction than it is in this direction. But that's why I left it thick, so that I'll be able to true it back up. Now, as you remember, I glued a tenon on the bottom. That was already dry, so that would not have moved. So I don't have to put that on the lathe and round it back up. Had I have used the regular material of the bowl to make the tenon, then the tenon would have went out of round as well, and I would have had to true it up before I could use it. But in this case, since that was already dry, then I don't have to square it back up. I can go ahead and mount this in the lathe and we can start turning. Like any other, at this point what I'm going to do is finish the outside. So I'll true it up. Once I get it round so that it's no longer, just so I get it round, then I'm going to stop at that point and switch to the inside. Because I don't want to take away any more material than I have to. And we'll engage the tailstock here. So let's talk about how out of round this bowl is. You see here, I'm touching on my tool rest. A little too much. But when I come around here, you see I'm 1/4 of an inch away. That means I've got to take 1/4 of an inch all the way off the outside of the bowl just to get the outside round. Now, fortunately, I've got over an inch, so I'll have enough material to do that. But that's why when you twice turn bowls, you do that to allow for the fact that it's going to move. And like I said, I'm just going to take the minimum amount on the outside off so that I've got enough material on the inside. Now, fortunately, I'm taking it off here on the inside or on the outside where it's touching. When I go to the inside, that will be the piece that I don't touch, whereas I'm going to stop here where I'm far away, but that's where I'm going to take it away from the inside. So it's not that I have to take 1/4 inch off the outside and 1/4 inch off the inside for 1/2 inch. Where I'm taking it off on the outside, I'll be taking it off on the opposite on the inside, if that makes sense. So I should only lose 1/4 inch and still have lots of material left. So now that I have it mounted up in the lathe, I'm going to just go ahead and, like I mentioned, I'm just going to true it up, removing the minimum amount of material. It is cutting well. You can see that with the shavings piling up on my hand. The shavings are smaller because it's dry wood than it was when it was wet. So the shavings tend to be not only smaller, but they're also hot, generally hitting my hand. But it is cutting well. And you can see there the rim at the top where I've removed the material. And all I'm doing is just checking to make sure that I'm touching everywhere, which I am. So I know that I've removed enough material. And then I'll just go and clean that up and remove the rest of it. So not only does the bowl go out of round in the circular direction of the bowl, it also grows taller but unevenly. So all I'm doing here is just establishing where the top of the bowl is going to be. I also have some areas there where there's a bit of the pith and a bit of bark inclusion. So since I have to square that end up, the top up anyways, I'm going to go ahead and remove that section as well. I don't lose that much on the overall height of the bowl, probably about 1/4 of an inch. I know I had said earlier that I had established the shape, and I have. Uh, 2 passes was probably all they required, but now I'm just doing some scraping cuts just to get a better finish on the outside of the bowl, just to reduce the amount of sanding that I have to do. So I did that with my gouge, with a scraping cut with it, and also with my scraper. So the outside of the bowl is ready. So I'm going to start sanding it here. In the beginning, on the coarser grit, I think I started at 80 here. I just used some sheet sandpaper. It's actually a sanding disc that eventually what happens is the Velcro wears off of them. So I just keep them if the paper's not worn out, and I will use them as sheet paper. Now, I typically don't like to go back and forth between sanding and a tool. That's a bit of a waste of time. But in this case, I had a slight hump right here at the bottom of the bowl, and it would have been way too much sanding to remove that, so I did go back with the scraper. Now we flipped around and working on the inside, so I'm just using my skew chisel to establish the thickness of the rim here. And again, you can see I stopped it just to make sure that it's what I want, that the final thickness is where I want. And then once I have that established, I can switch to my bowl gouge because I have something for the bevel to ride. When you're first working on that flat surface, if you touch it with your bowl gouge, it'll often just skirt right across or skate right across the top of the bowl, and you sometimes will get a catch. So I like to establish a little bit of a rim first, and then I can switch to my bowl gouge. Here you can see the outer roundness. Like at one point, I'm barely removing any wood, and on the opposite side, I'm removing a good 1/4 of an inch of material. So I put a coat of sanding sealer on the outside. You can see this is going to be a beautiful grain pattern as well. It's spalded. It is a crotch piece, although you can't see a lot of the crotch definition in it. But with that, it does bring up a couple issues. I've got some multiple piths to deal with, some branches here, but I had a pith here, and then I have another one here. That would be the opposite side, same one, but there's another one here somewhere. But the other issue that I'm facing is this crack here, which originally I thought I could just put some colored CA glue in, some black CA. It's opened up. As I start to thin the walls out, what happens in these bowls, there's stresses, they get relieved, and as a result, this crack opened up here. So I'm gonna have to, it's too big now to fill with CA glue. Coffee's not the answer either. I'm gonna put some black colored epoxy in it. It won't be that difficult to do. I've already got some sanding sealer on the outside, so it shouldn't stain it. I'll do the same on the inside, tape it up, and then pour the black epoxy in it. And let that sit for a couple days and then come back and deal with that. Other than that, the outside has been sanded to the first grit, sanding sealer applied. The inside has been sanded as well, but I will put a coat of sanding sealer on it before I apply the epoxy. Here I just used some tuck tape on the inside as well as on the rim and filled the crack up with epoxy. Now I have put sanding sealer on this so that even though I'm going beyond where the crack is, the sanding sealer prevents the epoxy from staining or sticking to the wood. I did end up filling it a couple times. You fill the crack the best that you can, but epoxy will shrink. and also get absorbed into the surrounding wood. So I did end up coming back a couple times just to fill it up. So the repair with the epoxy is complete, and it's here, black epoxy, and it's good. I dammed it up, formed it up, poured it, sanded it back, and now it's nice and smooth. I don't know if you can see, but there's a tiny little, and I mean tiny, divot right there where the epoxy didn't get leveled out, I guess. I'm just going to hit that with some colored CA glue. So I have some black and Starbond, and I'll put that in there and hit it with accelerator. And I also have a little bit right here. There was a knot there and a tiny bit of tear out, so I'll put some black CA in there as well. And it's just not worth, it's just not worth getting epoxy for that little tiny bit. It's not even that visible, but I can feel it with my nail. It does divot down a little bit, but I'm pleased with the way this turned out. It looks fairly natural. It's the best I could do with that crack. I like the look of it. It's black. The rest of the accents in this wood is black because of the spalding, as you can see. So it turned out to be a good repair. Up near the rim here, I still had a little low spot from the epoxy, so I just used my colored CA glue with a bit of accelerator. The accelerator makes the CA glue set up instantaneously, and then that way you can build multiple layers up. Here I had a little bit of a knot that had a crack in it, so I ended up also using my colored CA to fill this. So the bowl is sanded now. I ended up using epoxy and colored CA glue. There is, for example, a very small hairline crack here. I used colored epoxy and, I used colored CA glue in that black. It did a good job. When it's that thin, you don't see the epoxy, you can't see the opaqueness of it, so it really doesn't matter. It's just filler and color at this point. And I also, this is the epoxy, maybe you can see the difference. This was bigger, much wider crack that had to be filled, so it did use epoxy in those. But it's been sanded down now to 600 grit. It did take some hand sanding. The bowl had gone a little bit out of round. I could sand it on the lathe, but I also did some hand sanding. But we're ready to put the polishing paste on it, and then we'll apply the finish. I don't know if you can see it, but just the polishing paste, which does have some beeswax in it, really brought the color out in this. It darkened it down a bit. It feels smooth as glass. Really pleased with the way that turned out. So we're going to go ahead and put a finish on it, some tung oil, and then we'll put a wax finish on top of that. But really beautiful grain, really nice coloring, and very, very smooth. Here's the finished product, finished with a tung oil and buffed out. Here you can see the epoxy that's been filled from the inside. You can see here on the side some of the beautiful markings of the wood. My logo engraved on the bottom of the bowl. Again, the beautiful spalding pattern. Spalding wood is one of my favorites. Although the crotch pattern is not obvious in this piece of wood, I can still see it knowing that it's there, and it does make a beautiful grain pattern, and I do love the way that this bowl turned out. Let me know what you think, and if you're interested, I'll put a link at the end to the first part of the video where I rough these out.